On the outskirts of a bustling city in Virginia lies Harper's Antique Shop, a quaint store filled with treasures from the past. But among the charming trinkets and vintage furniture lies an item that no one dares to touch, a cracked, ornate mirror displayed in the back room. Legend has it the mirror is cursed, trapping the souls of those who dare to gaze into it. Our story begins with Alex, a history student looking for unique artifacts for a university project. While browsing the shop, Alex's attention was drawn to the mirror and seemed fed. Its frame, carved with intricate patterns of roses and vines, seemed to pulse faintly under the dim light. "Don't touch it," the elderly shopkeeper warned. "That mirror has caused more harm than good." Curious and skeptical, Alex returned to the shop that evening, sneaking in after hours indoors. As the shop's creaky floorboards groaned underfoot, Alex stood before the mirror. When they peered into it, their reflections smiled back, but Alex wasn't smiling. The room around them shifted, becoming darker and colder. Shadows moved within the glass, forming the figure of a woman in a tattered dress. Her eyes, hollow and filled with sorrow, locked onto Alex. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in Alex's mind. Terrified, Alex tried to look away, but their gaze was trapped. The woman reached out through the glass, her cold hand brushing Alex's cheek. In a flash, Alex was no longer in the shop. They stood in a dim, empty room, surrounded by mirrors that reflected infinite versions of themselves. The woman appeared again, this time standing just behind Alex. "She's coming," the woman said, before vanishing. Alex turned to see a towering shadow with glowing eyes closing in. Screams echoed as the shadow lunged. The next morning, the shopkeeper found Alex unconscious on the shop floor, their face pale and hands trembling. Alex refused to speak of what they saw. The mirror was removed the following day and locked in the shop's basement. But some say its faint glow can still be seen through the cracks in the floorboards. Would you dare to look into the mirror and face what lies beyond? Nestled in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains lies an old hiking trail, long abandoned and shrouded in mystery. Locals call it the Silent Path. Our story begins with Lisa, a 28-year-old adventure blogger from Colorado, known for seeking out remote and eerie locations. Lisa set her sights on the Silent Path, ignoring the warnings from the townsfolk. "People hear voices out there," the innkeeper told her as she checked into a nearby lodge. "Not the wind, not the birds' voices, they'll call your name." Lisa dismissed it as small-town superstition. The next morning, armed with her camera and gear, she hiked deep into the dense, misty forest. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. Birds stopped chirping, and even the crunch of leaves underfoot seemed muted. Hours into her hike, Lisa stumbled upon a dilapidated wooden sign. Faded letters read, "Beware, they watch." Unfazed, she pressed on. As twilight fell, Lisa noticed a strange hum in the air, almost like a distant song. She paused to listen. Then she heard it, a voice, faint and familiar. "Lisa." Her heart raced. She spun around, but no one was there. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. The forest answered with silence. Night fell quickly, and Lisa decided to set up camp. As she lay in her tent, the humming returned, this time louder, closer. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered and died. Shadows danced across the walls of her tent, though there was no light source. "Lisa, come closer," the voice whispered. Unable to bear it, she grabbed her camera and ran into the darkness, following the trail back. But the forest seemed to shift, the path twisting and leading her in circles. Finally, she emerged into a clearing and froze. There in the center stood a group of shadowy figures, their faces featureless, their forms pulsating with a faint, otherworldly glow. Lisa's camera clicked involuntarily, capturing image after image in. The figures turned toward her in unison, and the voice spoke again. "You shouldn't have come." The next morning, Lisa was found by a search party, wandering the edge of the forest, her clothes torn and her eyes wide with terror. Her camera was intact, but when she reviewed the footage, the images were black except for one, a clear shot of her own terrified face, with shadowy hands reaching out from behind. To this day, the Silent Path remains untouched, its secrets buried in the fog of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Would you dare to follow the whispers in the woods? In a quiet suburban town in Ohio, a family moved into an old Victorian house that had been abandoned for years. The Williams family, Sarah, David, and their 10-year-old son, Ben, were excited to start fresh, But from the moment they stepped inside, something felt off. Ben was the first to notice. Every night, he'd hear faint tapping from the basement. "It's just the pipes," David reassured him, but Ben wasn't convinced. The tapping was too deliberate, like Morse code, and always stopped the moment anyone opened the basement door. One night, while Sarah was unpacking boxes, she heard Ben talking to someone in his room. "Who are you speaking to, sweetheart?" she asked, Ben turning his face pale. "The man in the basement. He says his name is Thomas." "Chill," Sarah asked. "What does Thomas want?" Ben hesitated before whispering, "He wants us to leave." David dismissed it as Ben's imagination, but Sarah couldn't shake the unease. The next day, she found an old photo tucked inside a book in the attic. It showed a family standing in front of the house, except the father, labeled Thomas, had his face scratched out. Determined to get answers, Sarah researched the house's history. She learned that Thomas had lived there in the 1920s. After losing his job during the Great Depression, he had locked himself in the basement and never came out alive. His wife and children moved away, and the house remained vacant for years. That night, the tapping grew louder. It escalated to banging, shaking the floorboards. David, still skeptical, grabbed a flashlight and stormed down to the basement. The light flickered as he descended the creaking stairs. Then, silence. Minutes passed, but David didn't return. Sarah called out, but there was no response. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, locking her out. Ben screamed, "Thomas is angry. He doesn't want Dad here." When Sarah finally pried the door open, the basement was empty. David was gone, the flashlight lying on the floor. On the wall, scratched into the plaster, were the words, "Leave or join me." The Williams family fled that night, leaving everything behind. The house still stands, but no one dares to live there. Locals claim to see a shadowy figure in the basement window, watching, waiting for someone to come back. Would you dare to stay in a house haunted by its own dark history? Nestled deep in the remote wilderness of Maine lies Black Hollow Lake, a place of beauty by day and terror by night. Locals avoid it after sunset, whispering about a chilling mystery. A woman in white who appears on the lake's edge, luring travelers into her watery grave. Our story begins with Ethan, an adventurous hiker from Boston. Seeking solitude, he decided to camp near the infamous lake. Ethan was skeptical of the ghostly tales, dismissing them as folklore meant to scare children. On his second night, as the moonlight light danced on the lake's surface, Ethan heard a soft, melodic humming. Curious, he left his tent and walked toward the shore. There, he saw her, a pale woman standing ankle-deep in the water, her long hair flowing like mist. "Are you lost?" Ethan called out. The woman turned her face toward him, her eyes hollow and her lips curled into a haunting smile. She beckoned him with a single finger. Fear prickled his skin, but Ethan felt an unexplainable pull toward her. The closer he got, the colder the air became, until his breath fogged in front of him. Suddenly, the woman vanished, leaving ripples in the water. Terrified, Ethan stumbled back to his tent. That night, he dreamed of drowning, of being pulled into the icy depths by pale, clawed hands. When he woke, bruises in the shape of fingers marked his ankles. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan sought out an elderly local, Miss Whitmore, who had lived near the lake her entire life. Her voice trembled as she recounted the story. Decades ago, a young bride named Clara had drowned on her wedding night when her husband abandoned her at the altar. Since then, she's been searching for a companion to join her in eternal sorrow. Ethan's face paled as Miss Whitmore warned, "She doesn't give up easily. If she's marked you, she will come for you." That evening, Ethan packed his belongings and left the campsite. But as he drove away, his rearview mirror caught a glimpse of Clara, sitting in the back seat, her hollow eyes locked on his. What happened to Ethan remains a mystery. His abandoned car was found by the lake, doors wide open. Some say they still hear his screams echoing across the water on cold, quiet nights. Would you dare to visit Black Hollow Lake after dark?